The inferiority complex does not show up usually as merely weakness. It shows up also as the need to never be weak, to dominate, entitlement, the compulsion to win every argument, the inability to let someone else be right. From the outside, it might look like strength, and from the inside, it might feel like strength. And that's the trap. The compensation has been so effective for so long that the person running it has no reason to question what's actually driving it underneath.
Welcome to Beyond Success, the podcast for high achievers seeking deeper meaning, fulfillment, and purpose. Now, here's your host, world-renowned leadership coach and therapist, David Tian, PhD.
If you learned today that the ambition that built your career, the drive that earned you everything you have, was powered the entire time by a belief that you're fundamentally less than other people, would that change how you see what you've built? Most people want to say, no, the results are the results. The company I built exists. The reputation I've created is real. The money's in the account. But sit with it for a second, because the answer matters more than you probably think, and most of us move past that question way too fast. By the end of this episode, you'll be able to see a pattern that's been running your ambition, your arguments, your relationships, and your self-image, your sense of self-worth. You'll understand why a casual remark at a dinner party can set off a response in you that belongs on a battlefield, why you can't let certain people be right, why you've built a life that impresses everyone around you and still feel, in the moments when the noise dies down, like it isn't enough. You'll be able to name the engine driving all of it, and you'll understand why most attempts to fix this pattern end up actually feeding it. I'm going to be explaining this concept called the inferiority complex. The inferiority complex doesn't just distort how you feel about yourself. It also distorts how you choose intimate partners, how you lead teams, how you raise your children, how you respond when something you've built is threatened. Part of the inferiority complex is compensatory grandiosity. Grandiosity that's compensating. A man running on compensatory grandiosity simply cannot rest or recover. He cannot receive love without auditing it. He can't let someone else lead without experiencing that as some kind of demotion. And most concerning, every domain of his life is organized around trying to solve the same problem. And every fix he applies gets absorbed by that underlying sabotaging pattern and then repurposed to make that pattern stronger. So the thing he's using to solve the problem is the actual problem. Before we go any further, I need to clear up the misconception that keeps all of this invisible. Most people hear inferiority complex and they picture someone meek or hesitant, their head down all the time, or unable to perform. That's actually dead wrong. And that misunderstanding is precisely what allows some of the most driven, accomplished, visibly confident people to run this pattern for decades without ever seeing it. The inferiority complex does not show up usually as merely weakness. It shows up also as the need to never be weak, to dominate, entitlement, the compulsion to win every argument, the inability to let someone else be right. From the outside, it might look like strength, and from the inside, it might feel like strength. And that's the trap. The compensation has been so effective for so long that the person running it has no reason to question what's actually driving it underneath. And it holds up beautifully through promotions, through a marriage, through public recognition, right up until the moment it cracks and collapses. And when it does so, the man standing in the rubble doesn't understand what just happened, because the thing that just broke was the thing that he thought was holding everything together. So let's get into more detail about what this actually looks like in practice, because the inferiority complex doesn't announce itself with a big red flag. Instead, it shows up wearing very convincing costumes. And in high achievers, the costumes are especially good because from the outside, it looks like they're producing real results. So I'm going to walk through 4 different versions of this. As I walk you through these, I want you to notice which one makes you feel uncomfortable. Not necessarily which one reminds you of someone you might know, but which one reminds you of maybe yourself. Okay, so the first one I'm going to call the debate champion. This is the guy who cannot lose an argument. Not with his intimate partner, not with his team, not in a comment section at midnight when he should really be sleeping. Every disagreement, no matter how small, activates this same engine. Because for him, being wrong here means being wrong everywhere. And being wrong everywhere means the thing that he's been outrunning his whole life will finally catch up to him. So he litigates everything. The restaurant choice, the project timeline, whether it's supposed to rain on Thursday or not. He experiences all of this as intellectual rigor. He thinks he's being precise, but the people around him experience it as something else entirely. They experience it as exhaustion. His wife has given up on bringing things up to him. His team has learned to just agree and go along. And he reads that silence as confirmation that he was right all along. But, of course, he wasn't. Everyone else just got tired and fed up and gave up. Okay, so the second version is the resume builder. His identity is like a spreadsheet. Every credential, every title, every accomplishment feels to him like another brick in the wall. And the wall has a purpose, even if he's never looked at it directly. The wall is between him and the feeling underneath that he can't handle. So he never rests after a win. He never fully enjoys it. He's already scanning for the next thing that he has to acquire or win, the next degree, the next promotion, the next marker of status. And he's not ambitious necessarily in any way that actually feeds him. Like, he doesn't love the work. He's not passionate about it. He loves what the work means about him. Or more precisely, he needs what the work means about him. Because if he stops accumulating, then he has to sit still with himself. And sitting still means feeling. And that feeling that he's trying to avoid is, to him, intolerable. Okay, a third version is the generous tyrant. This one is very subtle. He gives lavishly. He gives advice or help or money or time. He's the first person to offer it. But there's a ledger. He keeps track. Not necessarily on paper, but in a kind of running tab in his head. And when the generosity isn't reciprocated with the right level of gratitude, the right deference, the right acknowledgement of what he's done, at least to his standards, then something inside him flips. The warmth goes cold. The help becomes leverage now. After everything I've done for you, he says. He didn't give it freely. He gave to establish a position. And when the position isn't honored, the shame underneath it breaks through as a kind of rage. The fourth type of character I'll point out here is the contrarian who's never wrong. He's got to be the smartest person in every room. He finds the flaw in every idea. He corrects people publicly, and he frames this as a commitment to truth. But is there a difference between loving truth and needing to be the one who has it? Because from the outside, those two things can look identical. But watch what happens when someone else is right and he isn't. Pointing that out and correcting him doesn't land as information for him. Instead, it lands as an attack on his existence. And that response tells you what's actually running beneath the surface of that performance. Now, these four characters are high achievers. The compensation is producing visible results, like your career or reputation or wealth. The pattern is destructive, but at least the destruction is hidden behind a wall of accomplishment. What I want to talk about next is the version where the compensation doesn't even produce that, where the inferiority complex doesn't just distort ambition. In fact, it prevents achievement. And this version might actually be harder to see for that person, because the person living inside it is absolutely convinced that he's trying. Okay, so the first version of this is the seeker of help who can't be helped. He asks for advice constantly from his parents, professors, coaches, friends, right? He presents himself as someone who genuinely wants to grow, and he'll do anything to do it. And if you watch him for like a week, you might actually believe him. But watch what happens when the advice actually arrives for him. If it comes from a peer, he'll just dismiss it. Like, they don't really understand my situation. If it comes from a parent, he'll bristle. They're being controlling. If it comes from a mentor or a coach, someone he sought out, someone he paid, someone he asked directly, he might take it in for a day or two, and then he'll start finding flaws in it. He'll poke holes in the logic, he thinks. He'll bring up edge cases. He'll debate the premise. He reframes the advice as something he already knew, but that doesn't quite apply to his circumstances. The pattern is perfectly consistent. He asks for help, he receives it, and then he has to defeat it. And the question is, why would someone seek out guidance and then fight it every time? Well, because accepting help from someone else means that person knew something that he didn't. That person was, for that moment, in the superior position, and that fact is unbearable to him. So every piece of guidance becomes a contest that he has to win. He doesn't experience this as resistance. He experiences it as critical thinking, which is one of the most elegant defenses the inferiority complex can ever produce. Close to this is the perpetual teacher who's never a student. So instead of debating the advice, he skips that step entirely and just flips the frame. He goes into teacher frame. He positions himself as the one who already knows. So in any group, he's the one explaining, lecturing, correcting others, not from genuine expertise, but from a compulsive need to hold the teacher position, the superior position. If someone shares something he doesn't know, he either redirects the conversation to territory where he can hold court, or he dismisses the topic as unimportant, and he just changes the topic. He gives unsolicited advice to people who never asked him. He talks over peers. He turns every conversation into a seminar where he's the one at the podium, and no one's invited him. The logic underneath this is almost beautiful in its simplicity. If I'm always teaching, then I never have to learn. And if I never have to learn, I never have to admit that I didn't know. And if I never have to admit that I don't know, the inferiority stays hidden. It's like this airtight system. The only cost is that he never actually grows. But that cost is invisible to him because growth would require the one thing the whole system was built to avoid. Okay, then there's the knife fighter. When the shame gets activated and the person doesn't have the resources to compensate through achievement or expertise, then the response turns aggressive in a very specific way. He doesn't engage the argument. He attacks the person making it. This is ad hominem fallacy. He questions that person's motives, their intelligence, their character, or he uses sarcasm. And the sarcasm is always deniable, like, hey, I was just joking. Don't be so sensitive, right? You're too sensitive. But the function is the same every time. Wound the other person enough that they stop pressing the point, because the point was getting too close to home, getting too close to the shame. And if the personal attacks don't work and the sarcasm doesn't work, he's got a third move. He changes the subject completely, abruptly. A new topic, a new grievance, a new tangent. Anything to derail the conversation before it lands somewhere that he does not want to go. This isn't conscious, necessarily. It's not calculated. Instead, it's reflexive. It's automatic. It's unconscious. The shame is about to be seen, so the nervous system pulls the fire alarm. The last one is the man who refuses to grow up. This is where the inferiority complex prevents adulthood itself. He's 30, 35, 40, and still living as though the conditions of his life are someone else's fault. His parents, the economy, women, society. He may have real intelligence and real potential, but he can't use either one because using them would require taking ownership of where he is. And ownership means admitting that his current life, at least in part, is the result of his own choices. That admission activates the shame directly. So he stays in a permanent holding pattern. He consumes advice endlessly. Books, podcasts, courses, YouTube videos, but never fully takes in any of it. He plans, but never fully executes. He treats preparation as a lifestyle. The inferiority complex has convinced him, below the level of conscious thought, that if he actually tries and fails, then the failure will confirm what he already suspects about himself. So he never fully tries. He keeps one foot out of every commitment and calls it caution, or perfectionism, or waiting for the right moment. It's actually none of those things. It's actually underlying terror. Now, I've walked you through 8 versions of this pattern. The first 4 produced visible success. The second 4 prevent it. But the thread running through all of them is the same. The compensation doesn't just fail to address the shame. It actively blocks the person from doing the one thing that would actually help, which is being honest about where he actually is. So, which of these did you recognize? And I don't mean which one reminded you of your brother-in-law. Which one made your chest tighten? Because the inferiority complex is always easier to see in other people. Seeing it in yourself requires a kind of honesty that the entire system was designed to prevent. So let's put a framework around what we've covered so far, because those 8 portraits aren't random. They're all expressions of the same mechanism. And a famous psychologist named Alfred Adler mapped this over 100 years ago. Okay, so here's how it works. Inferiority, at its core, is comparison organized around shame. It's the constant automatic measurement of the self against other people, filtered through beliefs that the measurement will come back short every time, regardless of the evidence. So that belief alone isn't the problem. Every child feels inferior starting out. When you were small, the world was big and the adults had all the power, literally. And that's universal. That was Adler's view. The feeling of inferiority is simply part of being human. The complex forms when that feeling becomes unbearable and the person builds a permanent pattern of compensating around it. And this compensation is not passive. It's almost never passive. It's grandiosity, overperformance, the drive to dominate, to prove, to be seen as exceptional. And then the pattern becomes the persona, maybe even the personality. And because the pattern often produces results like career success or social status or visible accomplishment, nobody on the outside questions it. Not his colleagues, not his friends, and certainly not the person living inside it. Why would he? The system is working, it's producing these results. That's keeping off or staving off the shame. Now, there's an important distinction to draw here. Low self-esteem says, I'm not enough. The inferiority complex says, I'm not enough, and I will build an empire to make sure no one ever finds out. The first one is painful, but it's honest. The man with low self-esteem knows he's struggling. The man with the inferiority complex has built such an effective fortress around that feeling that he's lost contact with it entirely. He doesn't feel inferior. He feels driven. He feels ambitious. He feels like he's a high performer. And maybe he is a high performer. And that's the part that makes it so hard to untangle this. The results might be real, but the engine producing those results is the problem. So here's a question that I invite you to actually sit with, not just listen to. Is ambition driven by inferiority less valuable than ambition driven by genuine interest or passion? Now, your first instinct might be probably, yes, of course it is. Real ambition comes from caring about the work. Compensatory ambition comes from running away from that feeling of shame. One is authentic and the other isn't. Simple. But actually, it's not that simple, because the harder question is, can you tell the difference from the inside? Can the person running this pattern reliably distinguish between, I want this because it matters to me, versus I want this because not having it would confirm the thing I can't face? Those two experiences might feel identical in the moment. The drive might feel the same. The focus might feel the same. The satisfaction of winning might feel the same. The only difference shows up in what happens after the win. The person driven by genuine interest or passion can rest. The person driven by inferiority is already scanning for the next thing, and he doesn't even know why. Sometimes the real problem isn't more effort or more motivation. It's knowing the right direction. A lot of people listening to this podcast are capable and driven. Things still look fine on paper, but life still feels strangely flat. When that happens, more advice usually isn't the answer. Clarity is. I've put together a short assessment that takes about 2 minutes. It's simply a way to see which area deserves your attention most right now, whether that's relationships, decision-making, or how pressure is being handled day to day. Based on your responses, you'll be sent a short set of masterclasses related to that area. If that sounds useful, you can find it at dtphd.com/quiz. That's dtphd.com/quiz. So let's go even one level deeper, because everything I've covered so far, the debate champion, the resume builder, the night fighter, all 8 of those are all outputs. They're what the machine or the system produces. But then the question is, what's the input? What's actually running the machine? And that is shame. Toxic shame. And I have to be precise about this word because a lot of people these days use it interchangeably with guilt, but they are not the same thing. Guilt says, I did something bad. Shame says, I am bad. Or more precisely, I am less than. And if anyone sees that clearly, I am finished. So guilt is about behavior. Shame is about who you are. You can fix behavior. You can correct it. You can't, however, fix who you are if you believe who you are is defective. You can only hide it. And that's exactly what every compensating pattern is doing, or trying to do. Every one of those 8 portraits that I walk through is a kind of strategy. not for addressing the toxic shame, but for making sure nobody else sees it, including the very person who's carrying it. The grandiosity isn't real confidence. I want to be very clear about that. It's the opposite of confidence. Confidence doesn't need to prove anything. Real confidence can be wrong and can be corrected. True confidence can sit in a room where someone else knows more, and none of that registers as a threat. Grandiosity, however, cannot stop proving. It has to keep the performance going, because the moment it stops, the feeling of shame is right there waiting. Now, there's another confusion I also want to clear up, because this really matters. People often confuse shame with humility, but they're not the same category. Humility is the honest recognition that you don't know everything and that you aren't better than everyone else. It's open. It allows other people in. Shame, on the other hand, is the terrified conviction that you're worse than everyone else, and you must conceal that fact at all costs. It walls you off. Even when you're performing connection, even when you're being generous or helpful or trying to be the life of the party, that wall is still there. So humility and shame might look similar from the outside. A humble man and a shame-driven man can both say, I don't know. The difference is that the humble man really means it and is comfortable with it, and the shame-driven man is managing how you see him. So let's walk through how this runs in real time. Okay, something happens, a perceived slight, a negative comparison, a moment where the guy feels exposed and the toxic shame gets triggered. He feels I'm less than. He thinks I'm less than. The nervous system reads that signal as a kind of threat, no different from a true physical danger. So his compensation fires up, dominate, perform, or withdraw, or maybe attack, whichever move is in his repertoire at that time. The compensation produces the result. He maybe wins the argument. He gets the last word. He gets the promotion. And the result then soothes the shame underneath, but only temporarily. So the behavior that got you this gets reinforced. And he never has to examine it, because why should he? It worked. Okay, here's what didn't happen. The toxic shame underneath it all was never addressed. It was merely managed. And managed shame has a short half-life. It always comes back. At 2 a.m, when the achievements can't distract him, or when his wife says something that slips past the armor, or when someone younger or smarter enters his field and that negative comparison engine fires up with nothing to feed it, the shame returns and he reaches for the compensation again, and the cycle runs again. And each time it runs, if he's good, if the compensating strategy is working and he's good at it, the pattern gets a little more entrenched, and the person inside it gets a little more convinced that the pattern is actually who he is. And that raises another, even deeper question. If the inferiority complex produces real results, like if it drives people to build companies or write books or lead organizations or accumulate real wealth, is dismantling it actually wise? Is it worth it? Maybe the shame is the fuel. Maybe the wound is the edge. Maybe the people who do the inner work and dismantle the pattern end up softer, slower, less competitive. Maybe you've seen that happen. The guy who goes to therapy finds some peace and then loses the hunger that had made him successful in the first place. Or maybe the entrepreneur who resolves his childhood issues but can't seem to close deals the same way anymore. The fear is real, and I want to take this seriously because a lot of high achievers believe this quietly but never say it out loud. They suspect that the pain is the price of their excellence, and they've made their peace with paying that price. And it's grinding on them, torturing them as they get older, but they don't think that there's any way out. But is it? Is the pain the price? So now I'm going to push back here. There's a difference between pain that fuels and pain that consumes. And the inferiority complex is not clean fuel. It doesn't just provide energy. It actually distorts your perception of the facts of what's going on. The man running on compensating grandiosity doesn't just work hard. He can't stop working. It consumes him. It controls him. He doesn't just want to win. He can't tolerate losing. He doesn't just pursue excellence. He collapses without it. That's not actually fuel. That's dependency. And dependency is a strange thing to call an edge. Aristotle made an argument 2,400 years ago that's relevant here. He said that virtue requires choice, that an action performed under compulsion, even if the action itself is good, is not the same as an action performed freely. The compelled act and the chosen act can look identical from the outside, but they're different in kind. And that difference is the difference that matters. If the drive to build, to achieve, or to lead comes from an inability to face shame, rather than from genuine passion about the work or care about others, then the achievement is already compromised. Not just morally. I'm not saying that it's like morally wrong per se. I mean functionally. The man building an empire to outrun shame will never enjoy that empire. He cannot. Enjoyment requires presence. It requires the ability to stop, to look at what you've built, to feel the full weight of it, and let that be enough. And presence is the one thing the compensation can't allow. Because the moment he stops and is fully present, that feeling of shame is right there under the surface and it's going to bust out. So the real question is, and I'd encourage you not to answer this too quickly, can you be ambitious without needing the shame to power it? Is there a version of drive that doesn't depend on the wounds? Most people never ask this because they're too terrified that the answer is no. They're afraid that underneath the compensating, underneath the grandiosity, underneath the relentless performing, then there's nothing. No drive, no fire, just someone who, without his pain, doesn't know who he is. And that fear, by the way, is itself the inferiority complex talking. So if this were some like normal self-help podcast, this is where you'd get like 3 steps. And it might be like, notice the pattern, sit with the shame, choose a different response. Maybe that's what you're expecting if you've listened to a lot of self-help. But that is useless. Not because it's wrong in principle. It's useless because the inferiority complex is specifically designed to resist that instruction. The compensating strategy isn't a behavior sitting on top of a stable self that you can just observe and then set aside. The compensation is the self, or at least it feels like what the person believes is the self. The debate champion doesn't walk around thinking, I'm compensating right now by debating. He's thinking he's a person who values truth and precision. The resume builder doesn't think I'm running from shame. He thinks he's a person who holds himself to high standards. You can't ask someone to notice a pattern when the pattern is the lens they're actually looking through. They'd be blind to it, right? This is where most coaching and therapy fails with this subpopulation. The assumption is that awareness leads to change for coaching and therapy. And for a lot of patterns, that might be true. But for the inferiority complex, awareness actually often leads to something worse, a more sophisticated version of that same compensation. The man reads about grandiosity in some book. He recognizes it. And then he becomes grandiose about his own self-awareness now. He adds it to his resume. I've done the inner work. I know my patterns. I've sat with my shadow. I've done the shadow work. And that insight ends up becoming another credential. The shame stays completely untouched, though. The armor didn't come off. It just got an upgrade. There's actually something ironic about this, if you can see it from far enough away, if you have enough distance from it. The tool you're using to dismantle the pattern is being absorbed by the pattern and then used to strengthen it. This is like superpower. The ox is looking for the ox, as they say in the Zen tradition. The search is the thing preventing the finding. If you're listening to this right now and thinking, okay, but what do I actually do about it? I want you to notice that impulse. It's very common among high achievers. Because that impulse right now is the problem pattern. The need to immediately convert discomfort into action. The inability to sit with a problem that doesn't have a clean solution yet. Okay, that's the compensation talking. It wants to master this the way it masters everything else, to shove off the shame. It wants to acquire the framework, apply the fix, add it to the collection. And this is the one thing it can't and shouldn't master, because mastery is the wrong frame entirely. So if this doesn't make sense to you and you can't handle this overwhelming frustration because of that, it might be because you're trying to see it through the lens of the inferiority complex. Okay, so let me bring this together. The inferiority complex is not what most people think it is. It doesn't look like weakness or being meek. It looks instead often like drive, dominance, the need to win every argument, collect every credential, hold the smartest position in every room. The compensation has been working for achievers. It builds careers. It earns you respect. It produces something that, from the outside, might pass for confidence. But true confidence doesn't collapse when someone else is right. True confidence doesn't keep a ledger. True confidence doesn't need to win a disagreement about where to eat dinner as though its survival depends on the outcome. What's been running underneath all of this is shame. The belief that the self, who you are, is deficient, and that every visible achievement, every promotion, every credential, every argument you win has been organized around one purpose, making sure nobody else sees that clearly, including actually you. Naming this pattern is necessary, but it is not sufficient. Because as we discussed, awareness itself can get absorbed by the compensation and then turned into yet another credential. The pattern doesn't dissolve just because you understand it. It dissolves through a totally different kind of work. And that inner work begins with sitting in the discomfort of recognition without rushing to fix it. Let me give you an example from someone I've worked with. I'll call him Marcus. He was a C-suite at a mid-cap firm. He ran marathons. He read voraciously. Everyone who's met him thought he was the most confident person in the room, and he came to me originally because his wife had told him that she felt invisible in their marriage, and she insisted that he see someone for it. He didn't actually understand what she meant, and he started with that. He provided everything. He was always present. He was attentive, or at least he thought he was all of those things. What he couldn't see was that every conversation between them was actually a performance. He was always teaching, always correcting, always positioning himself as the one with the answer, always helping. He wasn't doing this because he was arrogant. He was doing it because the alternative to him, unconsciously, was terrifying. If he wasn't the expert or the authority or the one with the solution, then what was he? That question had been running underneath the surface his entire adult life, and he never once let it surface. When we finally identified the belief driving the whole pattern, it was this: if I'm not the smartest person in the room, then I don't belong in the room. The recognition hit him physically. He sat with it for a full minute without speaking. And then he said, very quietly, "That's been running since I was 12. Since he was 12. Decades of compensation. An entire career built on top of it. A marriage shaped by it. And he had never seen it, because the seeing was exactly what the pattern was designed to prevent. Now, if you heard everything I've said today and you file it under, "That's interesting," and then move on, here's what will happen. The relationship where your girlfriend has stopped trying to reach you because every conversation becomes a lecture or debate, well, she doesn't leave right away. She instead goes quiet, gives up, becomes passive. But you read that quiet as peace, but it's not peace. It's resignation. The career that looks like success from the outside, but feels like a treadmill from the inside, where every promotion just raises the bar and the window of satisfaction shrinks from weeks to days to just hours. The friendships that stay shallow because you can't let anyone see you struggle. You can't truly ask for help. You can't admit that you don't know. The children who learn by watching you that love is conditional on performance, that mistakes are dangerous, that vulnerability is weakness. You don't teach them this with words. You teach them every time you have to win an argument that doesn't actually matter. Every time you correct instead of connect. Every time you choose being right over being close. The inferiority complex doesn't just cost the person running it. It costs everyone close to him. And the cost compounds across decades. But the other side of it is what changes when this all gets rebuilt. Someone who can sit in a disagreement with his intimate partner and not need to win, not because he's suppressing the impulse, but because the impulse has lost its charge. The stakes of being wrong about some holiday destination are no longer existential. He can be corrected without it feeling like he's being erased. He can let someone else lead without experiencing it as demotion or rejection. A man whose ambition is still intact, maybe smarter, sharper actually, because it's no longer scattered across 100 simultaneous proving projects. He pursues what he cares most about, not what soothes the toxic shame. He can finish something and feel satisfied. He can rest and recover without the restlessness that used to feel like drive, but was actually in reality fear. A person whose children see a father or mother who can apologize, who can say, "I don't know," who can sit with them when they fail without needing to turn it into some kind of lesson, because they're no longer terrified of failure themselves. This is not softness. This is what strength looks like when it isn't running on fear. The inferiority complex doesn't feel like a problem. It just feels like who you are. And that's the trap.